going?
Okay, we'll call this meeting of the
Awesome.
AMATS Technical Advisory Committee to order. I guess we'll start with roll call. Mr. Lindeman?
Present.
Ms. Horton?
Here.
Ms. Walsh? Here. Cindy Heil, did she tie in by phone? Did she call you, or does she know, is her phone number what she said? She's supposed to, she's wanting to tie in from Fairbanks.
Okay.
She didn't call you? Do you have her number?
I don't. No.
Well, she's calling in, she's probably using the bridge number, so.
Mr. Weaver? Mr. Hanson? Here. Jennifer's here, Mr. Morris?
Here.
And alternate for Ms. Goldie. And your last name again is? Oh, thank you. Do you have a quorum? Okay, Craig, please, the public
You bet. All AMATS meetings are public meetings and the public is invited to comment. We have a business item, we'll have a presentation by staff or consultant. And at that point, the committee will be given an opportunity to discuss the matter, and then we go to the public comment.
Hello? Okay.
She's there.
And let the record show that we have Ms. Heil tied in by phone from Fairbanks, huh? Can you hear
Yes,
us?
I can barely hear you guys. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
We're going to put you on the chair.
All right.
In the corner.
Picture of your face. Put a hat.
And
Okay.
Tina Snyder with Tina Systematic. I'm on the line as well.
Dina Snyder with Cambridge Systematics.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Approval of the agenda. Motion by Mr. Lincoln, second by Mr. Lau. Is that right?
Somebody's got it.
Locke.
Okay, flip this stuff.
Any,
Yes, item 6B, I think Angela is not going to be here.
so would you like to delete it and, or postpone it to the next time?
Postpone it till next meeting.
Okay, so would that be accepted as a friendly amendment? Okay, so it's been motioned with a friendly amendment to postpone item 6B until a later meeting. Is that okay? All agree? Okay, so approved. No minutes, but I've seen that they are in process. Thank you.
Yeah, we just didn't get it posted a week in advance, so we're all set.
Okay, so we're down to item 5A. Unified Planning Work Program, Budget Minor Adjustment Memo. Great.
Just a minor adjustment to make sure that we don't get over 110% in an individual element. So again, we have 5 elements, so 100 through the 500 element. And if we are over 110% of what we propose budget for the element, those $80 over 110% will not be reimbursed by the federal government. And so we want to not have that occur. So these are moving some monies around to make sure that doesn't occur. And you can see in the memo the specific moves that I have proposed. Task 110, taking $18,000 out of that, moving it to task 510. Task 140, reducing by 15,000, moving that to 510 also. Those two tasks, certification of the planning process, we had pretty much planned that we would be doing that certification in the fall of this year, and FHWA and FTA are not quite ready to come up. I think the tentative date now is sometime in either late February or early March of next year to do our certification, so the money that I had budgeted last year, we'll leave it all there. So we moved at 510. See the couple moves out of the 200 element that I have proposed, and then same thing with the 400 and 500 element, just moving some monies around so that we make sure we're under that 100% limit, so all of our efforts are reimbursed. I'm happy to answer specific questions there. For your agreement, in this case, a minor adjustment only requires TAC approval, and then we would let the policy committee and DOT know. So this would be your approval process today.
So just for clarification, this is not affecting the budget, we just approved, this is to make adjustments to the 2014.
That is correct, 2014 budget.
Okay.
Right.
Open to the committee.
And I just like to move to approve the adjustments to strike.
You have to open it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Does anybody in the public have any comments about item 5A? Okay, bring it back to the committee.
I'd like to move to approve the adjustments that are described here in the memo, December 4th memo, from Craig Lyon to the AMATS TAC.
Second.
Okay, motion by Mr. Miller, seconded by Mr. Lindenmood. Any objections? Okay, so approved. Thank you. Take the house in order on that.
Yes. I don't want to get city tax for those updates.
It's a little uncomfortable. Okay, moving on to the item 5B, 2040 NPT update. There is both a memo and a proposed approach. Is that you or?
I'll start with this and then we'll get into the questions. Vivian created that with a few comments here and there. But this is our proposed interim MTP approach, and we talked about this just recently, the idea that we would have this in the RFP for the full-born MTP as an additive alternate. The idea being that the last meeting we discussed that we would have the staff, the proposal was to have the staff take on this task of creating this interim MPP, and if for some reason we decided that this wasn't possible, we could add it into the MPP contract. But right now, the idea is as more research has been done, realizing that the amount of work necessary is something that AMATS staff can take on. So this proposal shows how we would go about doing that. It basically, just a kind of a dusting off of the financial, making sure all of those financial assumptions are still correct, making sure if any projects have been done, we take those out, show them as completed, things of that nature. So that's the general approach behind it. Answer questions. Basically, right now, it would show an approval around June 5th, 2015, but probably a little longer than that. But either way, it would still meet our deadline of June of the 2016 timeframe when our current MPP expires. And we just need to buy a little bit of time because we will still be going full ahead with our full-blown MTP update. We just don't want to get into a lapse. So, how many things did I miss on that, Vivian, and what should we clarify there?
Actually, if we do the 2035 update using the 2035 assumptions, it has to be done at the end of 2015. So that's the deadline. And we have touched base with FHWA to see what their response was verbally. I did get to speak with John Lowry on Monday. It just happened that John Lowry was there, and Al Fletcher handed me the phone. I wasn't trying to go around talking to the teachers, but so they said, call him. He handed me the phone, and I explained to him our situation. And I said that we wanted to present this to the TAC today. And verbally, he told me that he agreed with this approach, and he would get something to Craig the next day. He must have gotten waylaid because it didn't happen when I was out of town until December the 8th. So I'm fairly confident that FHWA supports this approach, but I can't speak for them yet.
Okay. And if I may, Vivian, John Morey stopped by our office and had the same conversation with the same, basically underscoring the need if you're going to use 2035, you got to finish it by the end of 2015. And he didn't seem to have any problem with it. And so I think it's safe to say at this point, absent even an email confirming that we have federal concurrence on this. We'll say it for the record.
It's kind of this is an aggressive schedule. It's sort of it's just showing you if we had an internal review draft by January 15th, we could get this done by June. That may or may not happen. That's kind of aggressive, but I didn't want to take the whole time. It's always nice to have a cushion.
Some questions, Greg, Vivian. So the intention now would be to do the interim MTP, and I think based on the staff assignments on the project team on page 2, which is Craig, Lisa, Jamie, Joan, James, Aaron, Vivian, and you as project manager. So you guys are going to focus on doing the interim and not do it with consultant services, kind of as we talked in the past. Last meeting, we wanted to add it as an alternate in the contract, put it a complete update. This would then not have that step, and we would just do it all with our existing resources, so.
Well, it does say potential consultant involvement,
Okay.
subject to successful and timely procurement process. So we might get halfway through and realize that it would be nice to have some help from the consultant. And I was going to put in the RFP max no more than $50,000 for that task.
Would it be a separate procurement or
No.
combined with the MTP entire update?
Well, I'm doing what you asked to make it an additive task, and any task related to the interim would be a separate line item, no more than $50,000.
Well, I think the reason I asked for it last time is I wasn't under the impression that the staff was going to do it in-house.
Oh,
So I'm
thought-
just asking, do we need, when we left in November, we were going to draft an RFP for the complete update with an additive alternate to do the interim. Based on this information, we don't need the consultant to do the interim. We're going to do it in-house with these staff people. But I also noticed you have a budget here. Is there going to be some staff resource, some consultant resources, whether it's in production or review or, I don't know. I'm just asking, or if it's completely.
I anticipate we're going to need some help from a consultant, and it might be with just production, because we don't have staff resources to work in design. Joni's time is all tied up with other things. So, well, and it could be just going to word wrangling or some other outfit like that.
Okay.
That we don't have to exercise that option with the RFP. It would be at our discretion if we need it.
Steve?
Just reading the approach, are you saying basically the modeling will be done on an as-needed basis if the demographic numbers change significantly?
Mhm.
And is that something you would do in-house as well, or get a consultant to do?
We'll be talking about that.
And then I guess the question would be, if you're modeling, does that expect that you might change some of the projects that are in the, you know, I mean, does that, I mean, that would, to me, it seems like, why would you model unless you're going to make changes to the network as a consequence of the modeling results?
I think it's expected that if we have significant changes, that we would do some modeling, and I guess we'll have to decide what constitutes significant changes.
But it sounds like if there were significant changes in the modeling, we change that to affect projects, then that's not just an interim MTP, that becomes a more significant project.
I don't think we really foresee that.
Yeah, I get, that's what I read between the lines, is that we don't expect you to
I
have.
certainly don't expect that we're gonna have modeling that shows, gosh, you can do all these more projects.
It's been 2 years, since 2012, and I don't think we're going to see change.
And Mr. Martin?
Looking through the document here, I applaud staff on the specific nature, or specific details given in the schedule. This is,
In the schedule?
it's very aggressive, and it's very detailed. I applaud you for that.
Oh, thank you.
I am curious about the schedule of this in relation to the RFP procurement that would go out. That takes a bit of time between the consultant selection process, the negotiation, the contract approval process. Is there really any time left using that model for that to even potentially work with us?
I believe so. We have these wonderful consultants working on our other projects right now, Cambridge and Parsons Sprinkler Hall. They're doing the heavy lifting with those projects right now. And our role is mostly review and comment. And
I'm sorry, I misunderstood. I thought that this was going to be attached to a pending RFP that was going to go out on the street.
it is. So my point is, the RFP is almost complete, pending your decision and the policy committee's decision on whether to do it this way, this approach. So all I have to do is, we have also just received the language that we're supposed to use from the Office of Employment, Equal Opportunity, which we've been waiting for a long time. So now, really, all we're waiting for is policy approval and your approval on this approach. I can put the finishing touches on the RFP, and it'll go back to DOT for final agency review, and then we'll push it through purchasing.
So then it would go to purchasing. Purchasing would advertise it for some period. The proposals would come in, they would be evaluated. They'd have to be, I don't know where your process, the negotiation occurs between their own contract approved by the assembly. But each of those elements, I have to imagine, takes a little bit of time. And I'd have to imagine it would take at least a couple of months.
Well, I'm anticipating we'll have a contractor on board by March 1st. That could be, it could go a couple of past that.
Suggest perhaps as an alternative that maybe for some part of this, we make use of the DOT contracting model. And we could do something under a small procurement process that's tailored, it's a small dollar amount, can actually happen fairly quickly. We could have somebody on board within, a month of push and go.
And that would keep it then independent of the larger LRTP, and so you would no longer have to have it as an alternate.
Yes, that's,
I think we'll be happy to explore any and all possibilities that will get us to the need. We're very, we're happy to think outside the box, whatever it takes to get us there. So, thank you.
but thank you for the schedule. I really appreciate it.
Other questions? Open it up to the audience here. Okay, Cindy, are you on the line? Do you have any questions or comments?
No, it's just kind of hard to hear, but I don't have any comments or questions at this time.
I move to accept then, there's no other discussion.
Second. Okay, it's been moved in second. It's open for discussion.
Just some comments, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So I think two things. I think the steps are here for the schedule, but I think there's no, I think unless all hands are on deck and calendars are cleared and other things on the work program are not happening, meeting this schedule in order to get it to P&Z is really gonna be a challenge for you guys. So, I mean, I'm willing to help where I can. I mean, I'm a little familiar with the financial section, so I'm willing to help there, and other pieces. But the steps for the interim are basically you're just making sure that your assumptions are still your assumptions. Well, we don't have much time to change them if we have to have the thing adopted in 12 months. So, if our goal is to adopt it in 12 months, we're not in a situation to change the network. I don't think the assumptions are going to change drastically enough that are going to modify any of the recommendations. The financial plan actually, that's going to probably be the long pole in the tent in this whole thing, to find out if we can afford it, if we have to move stuff around. I actually like the approach of doing it in-house. I'm a little concerned that the RFP that goes out for the big MTP will still include language that says, oh, by the way, we want you to do the interim. If you're gonna do anything like that, you be very careful about the task, because where are we gonna be done by the time that contract gets awarded? I think I can, we're not gonna get no disrespect, Vivian. I like the way you think. I'd love to have a contractor on board by the 1st of March. We'll be lucky to have them on by 4th of June. That's the reality, Jen. Prove me wrong, I'm gonna love it. So, I like doing it in-house, I think it's simple, I think we should support it, I think it's a good approach, and I think you got everything listed here, and we'll figure it out as we go. And you are gonna need some help kind of packaging all of the work that you do. I think that's not the time a senior planner ought to be doing, is developing a perfect readable document, so, but getting the technical stuff together is what we need you to do.
Thank you, and I don't know if I have to formally pass the gavel here. I would like to make some comments, even though I'm chairing the meetings, and I agree with Lance and with Ken that it's, again, applauding this aggressive schedule. I would recommend, very specifically though, that as we move forward as a body to keep, for all of the reasons that have been discussed, actually take any consultant services you need for this effort separate from the big one, because then you are hooking it on to a much bigger fish that you may not be able to control. If I don't know if I'm right, the first correct. That would be one thing I think I'd like the committee to discuss. The other thing is, because of the time frame, and an aggressive schedule, and the need to have all hands on deck, and to keep this committee and the policy committee from potentially disrupting the schedule because of inconsistent or non-shared expectations, I would highly recommend that at our January meeting, that the staff working together with DOT and again, all hands on deck, to do what we did before. You put the sideboards on what this extension is, this 2-year, why we're doing it, and what specifically it will and will not do. And I think modeling is one. If you start modeling anything, if you start adding or taking out projects, it's a problem, and you no longer have a simple, looking at it to see just holistically if the assumptions are still valid or not. The biggest thing too is the financial assumptions, and that's probably the key. Starting on that already, looking at it internally at DOT and working with our headquarters office on some of starting those discussions, because of that coordination with stuff that happened before that needs to happen again. But I would highly recommend that there be a resolution saying this is how we're going to do this interim and specifically why. And get those assumptions documented in terms of inflation rates, and that we're going to, whether or not we're going to accept, are we reasonable in our socioeconomic assumptions? Have we really missed the boat on anything other than perhaps the state funding projections? But I don't know how the committee feels about that, but I saw the value of it. If it hadn't been for that action before on the last MT, I don't know that we would have met our deadline. So that I would propose, I don't know how they actually deal with it, is with the motion before us.
Madam Chair, just maybe some clarity. I think the motion before us is to accept the process to do an interim MTP within our own staff resources, and then the basic outline of how to do. I think your comments about how we proceed as we do the interim, to have a resolution or an outline of these are the inflation rates we're going to use, and then modify the schedule. We can do
All
that.
the assumptions,
We can
yeah.
do that as
Right.
we proceed. So I call the question to accept the motion to accept the interim MTP with staff.
And what about the
No modification to that. Your comment was not to keep the contract separate. You can
Right.
keep contracting separate. Keep the little fish separate from the big fish, as you would say.
Right. Yeah. And so, but right now the fish aren't part of this motion.
I don't think so.
Okay,
So,
so,
point of order, who put the motion? There is a motion on it.
Jerry did.
Okay. We went into discussion like that, I'm sorry.
so the motion, the question's been called. The motion is to accept the staff approach to do the interim improvement, the interim MTP update in-house. Did I state it correctly? As proposed. Any further comment? Anybody opposed? Okay. And it is approved. We need to take that, now, we have to address the fish, just to make it clear.
Let's do it.
Go ahead, address the
You can just
fish.
have staff, I mean, maybe just direct us to prepare a resolution that will be similar to the last MPP, showing those signboards.
Why don't you do
That would be
that?
fine, but I'd also like to separate the fish. The big from the little fish. It's up to this board. To me, I think it would be clearer if we kept the interim totally contractually separate from the big one. And use whatever creative resources are available to you to get it done, to help staff, fill in the gaps, whatever we need to do, consultant resources, but not let that get attached and bogged down by the
We
big
will
one.
have a resolution for you, because that didn't work.
Oh, is there a motion? Does anybody, anybody want to? Is that okay? Is that
I think it's
acceptable to
fine.
staff?
Fine by me.
Is it acceptable
What do
to
you guys
you,
wanna do?
Vivian as project manager?
Yes, if you think that we could get some help from DOT with a contractor,
Absolutely.
if we need it,
This is pretty darn important,
that
yeah.
would be great.
They're on board.
You even heard it from Mr. Morton.
Yes.
It's always fine.
No, there are some things that DOT, some tools that we have for smaller, under 150,000, or some options we have. More simple procurement that could help.
We will work with James and Aaron to make sure that the resolution is crafted, to make sure we meet all your concerns.
For January?
For January. Yep.
Is there a benefit to formalizing that in a motion?
Not just paranoid and, just want to be clear, but no, I think it's fine as long as it's understood that we're not going to we're not going to put the little fish into the big fish. Thank you. And the other thing I would recommend is.
Why don't we take action on all of them? Did we conclude our, okay, we're good.
Yep.
Sorry.
And I would recommend that as soon as possible, we get a work session with those who are involved with the physical constraints analysis, because that's going to be the big thing, start that right away next week if we can.
Bring mine.
Huh? Yeah, do it after 5 o'clock. 5 o'clock, you bring it down and mark it. No, give me no. Okay, moving right along, we are on item 5C.
It's a brand new topic for you. Never seen it before. Third time's a charm. When we took these operating agreement revisions to the policy committee, they had a couple of directions. This is the operating agreement revision that has two things. One, it changes the S in our name from solutions to system. And the other thing it does is it creates a citizen advisory committee appointed by the AMATS policy committee, and it removes the planning and zoning commission's function of serving as our citizen advisory committee. At the policy committee meeting, there was some discussion about how many, whether or not a citizen advisory committee is required by federal law, and how many other MPOs around the country utilize citizen advisory committees, and also whether or not there had been a 30-day public review on this operating agreement revision. And let me see if I'm missing something else that they talked about. Okay, not at all. So. in
I
the-
think they also said ask whether it was even needed.
Yes. Needed and/or required.
That's correct.
So-
Because if it wasn't, the question was if it's not required, does AMATS even need it or want it?
Right.
That was from the policy committee? That question?
Right.
That
So,
wasn't the policy.
What was the answer to the policy committee?
So, in the memo here, 5C, if you get down to the, let's see, the third paragraph, the second one from the bottom, it says at the request of the policy committee. So, I looked in federal statute, there is nothing in federal statute, the CFRs, et cetera, that require the creation of the Citizens Advisory Committee. In their discussion on public involvement, they recommend it, but it is not required. The last survey that was done of the organizations of MPOs around the country was done in the 2010 timeframe. And of all the surveyed MPOs around the country, 41% of them had a citizen advisory committee. So we're in that 41% of organizations having a citizen advisory committee. I know for us, in terms of whether or not it's needed, my opinion is that one of my duties as AMATS coordinator is to ensure that we meet certification. And as I mentioned before, and you can see the indented paragraph here in the middle of the memo, the language that was included in the federal certification last time expressed what I believe is some concern about the makeup of the current Planning and Zoning Commission and whether or not that represents the diverse makeup of Anchorage citizens and transportation stakeholders. So that's partly why we talked about internally the creation of a citizens advisory committee. I think it is a very good sounding board to have a citizens advisory committee. And the current one that we utilize, planning and zoning, at times it has been challenged. And the suggestion that we create our own citizens advisory committee would give us a little more ownership over it. And I think it would allow us to create one that certainly has a much more diverse makeup. So I think that answers most of the questions. One that's not required, but I believe it's very helpful. 41% of other MPOs around the country are utilizing them. And this has not gone out for a 30-day public review as of yet. So the request today by staff is to release this or recommend the release to the policy committee if that's your desire for a 30-day public review. And I've also included the draft, or a set of draft bylaws or a straw man, if you will, for a proposed citizens advisory committee.
Question for the chair. So, in the last paragraph, then you talked about this proposed CAC would consist of a 9-member committee of at-large members appointed by AMATS PC. So what would be the mechanics of making those appointments?
So the way we have done at-large members in the past, the most recent is with our bicycle and pedestrian committee. We had 4 public seats on that committee. We had a number of seats that were specific to, a public health organization, a social services organization, et cetera, and then we had 4 public seats. And we just put out a call for interested parties. And they sent their resumes in, and then there was a small subcommittee that got together and looked at all those and came up with 4 recommendations, and we sent that through the TAC to the policy committee for approval.
So did you put out the call, website,
Community
email
council,
blast?
Yeah, all
Yeah.
of the above, as many different ways as we could. In my opinion, our challenge for getting members to show up to meetings, and the technical advisory committee is an exception, but the other committees, when we have members who are there by the basis of their job, they may not necessarily be that excited about going to the meeting. And so it's sometimes difficult to get quorums. The public seats that we have on the bicycle and pedestrian committee, those members are there every single time. They ask to be on the committee, and they show up every single time, and they're active, etc. Part of the reason why I suggested these at-large members is most of the other citizens advisory committees that I looked at around the country, they're in MPOs that have 3 or 4 local governing bodies inside their jurisdiction. So in other words, they have the municipality of Anchorage, they have another municipality, another city, and another town. And so when they go to create their committee, their citizens advisory committee, they just say, we need 2 from town 1, we need 2 from town 2, and 2 from town 3, etc. And so it's really easy to draw those people out because they get appointed by the mayor of that that area. We have 1 governing body in our locale. So we could have the mayor appoint 7 or 9 members, or we could do some at-large members who, in my opinion, that would give the ability to get people who are already interested in serving instead of appointing people and they may or may not be interested.
Can I say something?
Yes.
Okay, first of all, I think the memo is good. I think we should expand on it just a bit in that final paragraph to talk about the history of AMATS and how long, even though it's had various forms from an original CAC to then to the planning and zoning, but I think it would be very illuminating to show that AMATS has had a citizens advisory committee for a very long time. And it's an expectation in a sense, and it's woven into our public involvement program and everything. And I think that maybe adding some of that context to that memo would be prudent. Second, I think having a citizens advisory committee is a really good idea, and I'm very much supportive of that. And while I somewhat disagree with having all the at-large positions at large, I think we should at least attempt to identify a couple seats, or I think we need to at least define within the bylaws the procedures that you described on how they would be recruited, and that we at least try to put in some boundaries on how the recruitment is finally selected. So for example, you wouldn't want all 9 at-large people to come from the hillside. I mean, we're gonna have to have a representative from Eagle River, Eagle River, who still be at large, but it still needs to have somebody from that area. If we broke Anchorage into geographical locations and said we need to have somebody from each of the, or 2 from each of those geographical locations. So I think it's not a really good start, but I'm wondering if maybe we should, maybe have a work session just so I can really hammer out some ideas and flesh out those areas just a little bit more in the bylaws, so that we can get some good public comment when it is released, so people have a little bit more understanding about the mechanics to it.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from the committee?
Well, just a question and follow-up. Were we requested to approve all this stuff in front of us now, or just a presentation to us and we'll come back again to approve at time?
What is before you today is a request to release the operating agreement revisions for 30-day review, or alternatively, to recommend the policy committee to release that. The bylaws are not, they're not suggested that you are either releasing these today or adopting these. This is just a straw man that the policy committee asked for us to present to you, so you could kind of get a sense of what one suggestion for the makeup of that committee might be.
But the thing about the policy committee was that they wanted to know the details. They weren't going to take from when I was sitting there with them, the impressions I took away from it was, yeah, the operating agreement was interesting, but without the details. So I don't think we can put out the operating agreement without the bylaws with them. I think the bylaws are very important. I think the details are really important, so they know what it all entails. And I don't think the straw man is detailed enough to be released.
Yes, Steve.
I agree with Cindy. I think we need to have a better sense of what the committee's composition will be and what they will do. And one question I have is, what sorts of things are brought forward to the Citizen Advisory Committee? As I recall, the Planning and Zoning Commission would just review the major documents, the MTPs, the TIPs. The expectation is that they don't review every minor amendment and provide advice to the PAC and policy committee. I mean, if they're meeting quarterly, obviously they're not going to be able to keep up with the committee. So I think maybe we even need to define the kinds of documents that they will review.
The current Citizen Advisory Committee, the Planning and Zoning Commission, looks at all of our plans, and it looks at the major amendments to the TIP. They look at the UPWP, the work program, although they do not approve the budget. But other than that, they look at every other meeting plan that we do. So, the idea was quarterly meetings or as needed. So if we had a quarterly meeting and then the following month we need to approve TIP amendment, they would meet. So that's kind of the idea, is they would look at all of our documents that we have shown up to kind of get the citizens' view on it.
Chairman, I would agree
Yes.
with Mr. Morris that it really should be identified as to what their responsibilities are, just to be clear for historical purposes. But, and I agree that we really need to define the group. And we need to probably just have some discussion about it today, but if there are 9 members on this entity, I would suggest, just for discussional purposes, that 4 perhaps from the rural area, 1 from the Chugacki River, and then 3 specific members with professional affiliation that would help that group, that they not just be all citizen, quote, lay citizen advisory.
Okay, we've had a lot of good discussion here. Before we bring it back to the committee for action, is there comments from the audience in this section? Item before us? Okay, it's back to the committee. What is the desire of the committee?
Move to postpone the action, have a work session and finalize and work on the bylaws and put it out as a package.
Okay, we have, it's a tie between Mr. Lindemood and Mr. Morris. On a second, with a motion by Ms. Heil to postpone this action and have a work session to, if I got it correctly, to work on the details of the bylaws. Is that correct?
Correct, and then for, the goal would be to release it as a package with the operating agreement and the bylaws together.
Is that an amendment to your motion?
No, that was a clarification to my original motion.
Got it. As clarified, with the goal to release the bylaws with the operating agreement. Correct?
Right, well, after the work session. Our intent of working with the intent of the work session is to develop the bylaws so that we can ultimately release the bylaws and the operating agreement together.
Okay, so it's been motioned and seconded to do what Cindy said, postpone work session bylaws to be released at the same time as after the work session with the operating agreement. Any opposed? Okay, so approved. Now, we're moving on to item 5D, congestion management process objectives. There's a request from the committee, and thank you to our consultants who have been patient with this item being on the agenda for the last couple of months and us not being able to. Craig, is it?
Thank you, Madam Chair, and Technical Advisory
We need
Committee.
to watch this right.
There's a presentation for you today on the work that's been done to date, and the technical memorandum number 1 is before you for your approval today. And there was a work session earlier today and some discussion about how to maybe move forward with that. I have Dan Kretschmer with Cambridge Systematics, who will be making the presentation. He's a project manager for this particular congestion management plan update. The staff member, Dina Snyder, is not with us today, but she's done a lot of work. Oh, she's on the phone. Dina is on the phone. Les Jacobson is here with the ITS with President Friedrich. And then Carla Slayton-Barker is here supporting locally these 2 projects with Solstice, Alaska. And I will turn it over to
Thanks, Drew.
Oh, and Vivian Underwood is also the co-project manager on this.
Thanks, everybody, for listening today. And Dina prepared most of this presentation, so her name's on it, but I have to take responsibility too. Hopefully she'll help me out when I need it over the phone. There are 2 parts basically today. One is we're going to go over the results of an online survey that many of you filled out, and we thank you for that. And then the second part is going to be to talk about the congestion management objectives memo that is out in draft. We'll kind of walk through that, explain what we're looking for in terms of our ability to go to the next steps on the project. We'll talk about what we're going to do next, and then have some discussion. there are two surveys we're doing as part of the congestion management plan. The first one was really to kind of get a grip on how people view congestion here in the Anchorage area, what they see as the causes, the major issues. Pretty broad brush. We have a second one that's out there now, and again, we'll thank you in advance for filling it out, those who do it. Just went out last week, and or the beginning of this week, and that one is an attempt to get more specific information about where the problems are, hone in a little bit more detail on what we need to look at as part of the plan. So again, this one kind of asks state of congestion, what are the causes, some of the critical issues that are out there, and also tried to take a first shot at the regional objectives. The response rate we got was very good for this type of survey. You usually don't get that high a response, so we were very pleased to get as many back as we did. We had a series of pictures on there, as most of you saw, just to kind of, you know, get the idea. It's sometimes hard to, you know, get the idea to people in words. People have a different idea of what congestion is. So I won't walk through all those in detail, but, you know, I think none of this is going to be a surprise to anyone here about what the priorities were. The first three clearly kind of separated from the rest in terms of construction and the fact there aren't ways around it a lot of the time. You know, better management of the system, essentially, and of course winter weather and truck traffic at the port also came up as a high percentage. But you know, everything I think on the roadway side got pretty high percentages, and you know, you generally in these surveys get, you know, lower percentages for the last two there, the more non-motorized modes. But as we'll show you in a minute, people start to see that as a lot of the solution. So again, this is, I won't walk through all these. They kind of repeat, you know, what were in the pictures. These were more specific issues people were asked to rate the importance of, and again, it kind of mimics what you saw on the last slide, so won't go through in detail. This was kind of an important issue we wanted to get at. Is this a problem all the time, or are there just these major, is it really just that there are major events that happen in terms of weather or incidents that you know, frustrate people and cause a major disruption? And pretty much a consensus that at least on a weekly basis there are congestion problems in the region. So you know, that was sort of interesting and I think informative in terms of some of the solutions that might come out of this.
How does that compare to other states that or other communities where you've done that? Do you often see much higher perceptions of congestion, that it's more of a problem? I mean, I'm surprised it's like that it's kind of low for people's perceptions, but how does it compare to some of the other
Yeah, I mean,
kind of?
You know, if you go to a really big metropolitan area, you don't really even ask it because it's sort of, you know.
100%.
Yeah. But, you know, I think for sort of your medium size, the smaller size, I think this is actually fairly high that people would perceive a problem on a daily basis, I think, or several times a week, you know, I would say. You know, because you kind of hear different opinions of people saying, well, it's not really congestion or it is congestion, but you know, that's what we call it. It's a congestion management plan, and whatever people's perception is, they see it as a regular problem.
Perception's the idea that.
Is that a problem? I didn't say it. And you know, then we kind of ask people what are the most important or urgent things to address, and interestingly, again, people kind of see transit, more transit service and coverage is kind of up there as one of the top solutions. And then there are sort of things that relate to to reliability, freight movement, incident management type activities, and you see, non-single occupant modes in there as well. So, here was a situation where kind of people saw a lot of solutions as being pretty close to equal. So, that's good. It's a package of things that people are looking toward and not one solution. That kind of is the overview of the survey. We did pass out a summary of it, so I don't know if at this point people have questions, observations about it before we move into the objectives.
Did you differentiate in the survey between like commuting traffic and other just general traffic congestion? With these responses, did you break them? Because obviously there's probably on the Glen commute, there's probably 100% response that there's congestion issue there.
Yeah, I mean, it really wasn't a large enough sample to break it down geographically. I think we did have some things in here that related to commute versus non-commute. And that's sort of the purpose of the second one, is for people to come forward and say, where are the problems and when do they occur?
What was the sample size?
We had it up on the first slide. 29 responses. Dina, do we get any more after this slide was put up?
Any more responses?
Yeah, beyond the 29 that we have on the slide.
I actually would have to go back and take another look at that and see if we've had any additional ones come through.
Okay, thanks. Probably not many more, though, if we did, so it was roughly 30. Any other? Okay. Thanks. We'll move on now to the congestion management objectives, and what we're doing in this memo, and we had a lot of discussion about it earlier, was to try to establish a relatively limited set of goals and objectives to help move this project forward. The next steps beyond that being, okay, we have an objective, how do we measure it? What sort of measure do we use? What data do we need to support that? Do we have that data? Can we get it? So, just people in looking at the memo, I think, saw us take a few steps into that area. So, I just want to make it clear we're really just focusing on the objectives here today and trying to get people to understand those and speak up. And as we go forward into the next phases of it, this is something we can revisit depending on what we find out or how people react to the performance measures and the data requirements that are going to be there to support those. So the framework of this is really to develop a series of congestion management objectives, and the SMART is another one of a million acronyms we have in transportation. But these are the characteristics we're looking for, specific enough to actually provide guidance, something you can measure, agreed upon. There's a consensus that that's a reasonable objective, that it's realistic, and this is of course a key one, as I mentioned, and that the time frame you're looking at for this plan, which ideally is sort of a 5-year update, is served by the objectives that are there, that they're reasonable in that sense. Where we started here was with the 2035 MTP. We linked directly to the goals and objectives in there and use those as a starting point. Not everything in the MTP necessarily relates to congestion management. So we tried to narrow those down, and we actually kind of simplified the language in some cases to make them more concise. So I just want to walk through each of the MTP goals and the objectives that we're proposing here as an initial set, and feel free to jump in and make comments as we go forward here. So the first goal category, and these goal categories are fairly common to most transportation planning exercises. So I think everybody's pretty aware. The first one has to do with efficiency and reliability of the system. Probably focus heavily on the roadway side, but not totally. And these are the three objectives identified, or reducing delay and improving travel times during the commute periods. We know there's certainly a big difference in the traffic and activity here seasonally, so trying to mitigate any impacts from those peak period times, keep it as even as possible throughout the year, and then reducing the non-recurring delay that's caused by incidents and construction and other activities that have to be done out there, many of the latter to the special events and work zones occurring during the season when you have more traffic as well.
Dan, I have a question. You said the on the left are the existing adopted MTP goals.
Correct.
Efficiency and reliability. Are the CPM objectives, are those listed in our currently adopted most recent CPM, or are they not? So if you look at our last congestion management plan, it has objectives in it on things we want to do. Is this list found in that document as well, or hit and miss, or I don't know?
I think we really structured it around the MTP objectives, but I think we did go back and look at it. Dina, do you have any clarification on that?
I'm sorry, I can barely hear the discussion. Can you repeat the question?
Yeah, the question was how much did the previous CMP goals, CMP objectives figure into these? And my answer was we pivoted more off the MTP objectives, but we also looked at the previous CMP ones.
Yeah, and one of the things too, the previous CMP objectives seem to be more related to actually how the study itself was done, and not necessarily performance-related objectives, which is kind of one of the distinctions, I think, between the previous version and this update.
Thank you.
So they really didn't, there really weren't any specific performance-related objectives that were able to be carried forward. So yeah, so we used the 2035 MTP as kind of our initial basis of what to focus on.
Okay, thanks, Dina, appreciate it. The next category is safety and incident management. Two fairly common measures of that are the crash rates for regular traffic fatality, serious injuries, and then commercial vehicles and non-motorized traveler crashes. And then finally, the incident response and clearance times on the major highways. The travel options is where we start to get into multiple modes of travel, all kind of combining to reduce single occupant vehicle use, rideshare program, again, something hopefully can be measured through participation, mode shares of non-single occupancy vehicles for work trips, commuter trips, reduction of emissions, which is kind of a secondary objective beyond, but clearly one of the major things people are concerned about here. Improving the opportunities for non-motorized transportation, and reducing, sort of facilitating transit service, improving the travel times through whatever means can be done along the roadway network. Whether it's sort of making it easier for the buses to move on and off the curb, signal priority treatments, that type of thing might be considered. So those are the major objectives under the travel options or travel options goal. Freight is an important consideration here, as it is in a lot of places. And here we have two objectives. mainly just allowing, making sure that the corridors where freight does move or needs to move are open to facilitate that movement, and that movement doesn't occur in places where people don't want it, which is kind of the other side of that, and making sure that those corridors are in physical condition to take that traffic as well. System connectivity is another MTP goal. You know, people have noted there's sort of gaps in both the roadway network and the non-motorized system as well. So one of the objectives here is to make sure that the roadway hierarchy is clear for planning purposes and is kept up to date. Access and connectivity is starting to really tying together kind of all the modes to talk about efficiency of the system as a whole. And essentially both of those really, the first one just says, you know, making people's trips more efficient in terms of distance traveled and time traveled. And again, the second one is kind of some supporting activities to help obtain that efficiency in terms of person miles traveled and passenger hours traveled. And then finally, transit-oriented development, which is probably more of a longer-term objective, but you know, within the framework of the congestion management plan, promoting the type of development that provides more riders for the transit service and more users of non-motorized modes and shortens auto trips, possibly help reduce auto ownership as well, you know, depending on how it's done. So again, that's something you can track, but it's certainly something that takes a while to manifest itself. So those are our objectives as proposed. And again, our next step is to say, take these and say, you know, what are the best ways to measure these, and what information do you need to measure them, and then what does it take to sort of collect, manage, and maintain that information over time. So, you know, as we go forward with that, and we'll be talking about that in February at the meeting, that's when you can come back and kind of say, you know, okay, maybe we want to tweak these a little bit, maybe we want to make some changes to them, but I guess, you know, the question is, do people see these as a good path forward to continue the project?
On the follow-up survey,
How do we get to that?
Should have come to you in an email. I got an email.
Yeah, give me your card, we'll get it to you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I know the first one did, but our spam filter's been,
Oh, okay.
So-
Okay, it's stuck
I don't
somewhere.
even know if I got it.
Okay.
Maybe I missed something. How were those initial 29 stakeholders, or 72, whatever it was, that you got some responses from? How were those selected?
Those are part of our stakeholder team that we developed through project management plan. And those are largely TAC members, technical members, members of our various advisory committee members, and some other individuals that would have interest in congestion management from other agencies. And so those were the individuals that were invited to participate. And if you want to see that list, I'm sure we can get that to you.
One thing we've taken a look at, just a couple of points about MAP 21 requirements as kind of a background in terms of setting targets. And again, I probably don't need to walk through all of this, but just to note that there is going to be rulemaking. There are going to be some required performance measures that are going to be coming out in 2015. In terms of this type of activity, probably going to be some measures related to reliability, travel time, safety, possibly, multimodal measures as well. So that's, again, something to just watch and monitor. Next step, as I mentioned, one thing I didn't mention, we're right now working on a defined CMP network, really starting from the one that was defined in the last CMP and tweaking that a bit. We have layers for pretty much all modes for roadway, pedestrian, bike, transit, freight movement, and major regional connectors. And again, as I mentioned, we're looking to identify some performance measures, and the data management piece is kind of attached to that to say, what do you need to in order to make that work and actually develop those measures. That wraps up the presentation. So if anybody has any further questions, comments?
So, if I recollect correctly, the schedule for this is for it to be done this summer?
June.
June, all right. And then what would the time frame be for the next reevaluation of the effort? Or is this expected to be result in an annual report, or what's going to come out?
It's part of our work effort, we're developing a dashboard along with this so that we can, and I think Lance brought this out, what is the purpose of this and who needs this information? So is it the consumer, is it us, who is it? To start taking a look at how well are we doing, what are we investing in, are our dollars being wisely spent? So maybe taking a look at some problem statements, and these type of documents have to be updated, I think, once every 5 years. So another update of this particular document would occur at that time. But I get the feeling that it should be at least a relating document that we could recommend.
Second question would be the data collection necessary to support this effort. It's all going to be identified as part of this process. And will there be enough information for a baseline dashboard indication in June, or that's to be determined?
I think that may be to be determined, but definitely that's part of our work effort, is to develop some of those baseline. And there is some information that our traffic department has that we could potentially use to develop that. But we want something that's useful and put out something that people can use and utilize. I don't think we just want to put out anything on the dashboard, just simply to have it, I guess is my point. And as you may know, as part of our scope of work in our RFP, we've specifically put in a data management plan so that we would understand what do we need to do for data management, what do you need to have, or what does that organizational future of that data look like. And of course, technology can change tomorrow. We could all have great applications on our cell phones, or I don't know, it moves way faster than I can. But to start thinking about some of those things, so I think those are excellent questions, and we'll definitely take a close look at those.
Yeah, I think the data management plan would definitely look forward a little bit to some things that maybe aren't quite there yet, or aren't there quite yet in this area in terms of data collection. But within 5 years, you may have some pretty rich data sources that just don't exist.
Right. Or maybe we won't, and we'll know not to have that performance measure.
So specifically, at this meeting, were you hoping to get some feedback on the CMP, post-CMP objectives specifically? Is that kind of what you're looking for?
Yes.
Whether those are meaningful, whether we have some questions about them?
Yeah, that's what we would hope, that we could take those and then move those forward to the next phases. Those are really the basis of identifying. We have a long list of performance measures, as you see, and we need to weed through those.
Now, some of them seem, maybe I'm not sure I understand all of them, and some of them seem like they might be redundant. I mean, they get at kind of the same thing in some cases. Is that, are you after a simplification, maybe eliminating the list to make your job a little easier, kind of hone in?
Of the performance measures?
Yeah, the CMPs, yeah.
Well, the objectives are what we're really looking for people to say, those are okay, those are reasonable to move forward. And then the performance measures that are
I'm sorry, the congestion management.
Yeah, the objectives are what we're looking for feedback on. again, that's kind of the performance measures that are listed in there, kind of a laundry list right now. Certainly be narrowed down.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's right. Yeah.
Well, if you want a specific recommendation, I would suggest that you delete the reduce CO emissions through congestion management. I don't think that that's really a meaningful objective anymore for Anchorage. I think that the problem's not related to congestion. And well, I guess there's not really a problem in it, and it isn't related to congestion anymore. So I don't think that's something you need to look at.
Okay.
Okay, other questions from the committee or the project manager, the consultants? Okay, opening it up to the audience, if there are questions or comments on what is before us today, and that is a recommendation to accept and advance the congestion management objectives. Any other questions, comments? I guess we can move that.
I just like to thank the other internal team members that were involved in the document, Aaron Munda and the DOT, Team Sunday with public transit, Kim Carpenter with traffic, and Stephanie Mello.
Okay, what is the goal of the board, the committee?
Chairman, I have a question. Steve's last amendment to eliminate CO as a objective. We're not measuring, we're not having a problem, but isn't it an attribute to
Well, I
reduce
can
CO?
tell you that right now we don't measure at intersections.
Okay.
There's no way to evaluate it, you know, and we are, and the problem is not even at intersections, it's in neighborhoods. The concentrations of neighborhoods are higher than they are in major intersections. So, I'm not saying that congestion doesn't lead to higher CO in the vicinity, but that's not the main problem. It seems like it's redundant. I mean, you probably want to reduce congestion. The primary purpose of reducing congestion is to reduce congestion, and a side benefit is reducing CO. And so I just think it's a redundant objective.
Direct linkage is a great example.
And more specific suggestions, it says on page 310, there's increased promotion of and participation in the rideshare program. But I think we should broaden that to the rideshare and cooling program, or one or the other.
Actually, when we take action, we can specify it. Okay, and right now, just for clarification, the committee is focused on the proposed CMP objectives, recognizing that the proposed measures will have opportunity for further evaluation and comment on that as we move towards the February workshop, correct? Is that my understanding?
Yes.
Okay. And yeah, now is a good time, if there are questions or comments from the committee, now is a good time to raise those as well. So it's a good test of your goals and objectives from your MPP to see how well it can actually translate into implementation and monitoring. You did a good job. Does anybody have any other comments or questions, so we can go ahead and take action on this? We've had a couple of changes proposed for the objectives.
So do those need to be put forth as a motion?
I think we need a motion on the table to amend. Madam Chair, I move that we accept the proposed or the draft objectives for the congestion management plan.
So moved by Mr. Wilbur, seconded by Ms. Watt.
And Madam Chair, if I could, I would also propose that on page 310, on table 3.1, under travel options, the third bullet, that we delete the objective of reduced CO emissions through congestion management. And that on the first bullet, under travel options, we add the word van pool after the word share a ride in the first bullet.
I'll second.
Okay, so we have main motion and then,
We're working on the amendment.
so the amendment is to make those two modifications on page 3-10. Any others?
For the, under the objectives.
Do you have anybody else have any other? Okay, so we take action on the amendment first. Okay, so the amendments, page 310, add van pool to goal number 3, travel options, first bullet. And then eliminate the third bullet, which states reduce CO emissions through congestion management. It's been first and seconded. Anybody opposed to those amendments? Okay, so the amendments are adopted, and that brings us to the main motion then, which is to accept the proposed congestion management plan objectives. Anybody opposed? So it passes. Thank you. Good job. Okay, so that brings us to, man, we're kind of done. Okay, it's 5E, 2015-18 administrative modification number 1. Memo and tip.
He's not even trying this thing. You've amended it already, James? You've got a lot of good projects in there. I smell pavement up here.
Well, you know, the tip
It's the smell of asphalt. The smell of asphalt.
as you know, the tip is a living document. It's always changing. Before you, there are two items that we're bringing as a part of this tip modification. The first one is in Table 3, roadways. We would like to show an AC from 2016 to 2013 for the Minnesota Drive Mobility and Safety Study. We think this is an important project, and we'd like to see it, move forward sooner than later. And then also, Table 10, the pavement replacement programs. We needed to make some updates to those two tables and include some additional pavement replacement projects and the pavement replacement program, and also in the AMATS repair and principal arterial paving program. So those are the two action items as a part of this tip modification for your consideration. And I'll answer questions if you have any.
Okay, just for clarification, James, on Table 10,
Yes.
there are two lists. One
Right.
is from the TIP AMATS allocation, and that's the first group of projects, to which we are adding 2.
Yes.
And then there is the second box, which we're adding 3 projects to begin the design on principal arterials, which are outside of the AMATS allocation, but are funded through the STIP.
Correct,
Okay.
yes.
Madam Chair, James, in the memo, you say we're adding 3 projects. In the red ink, you only have 2. The third one, the Rabbit Creek Road, West End Seward Highway Bridge from Hillside Drive. Sorry.
Yeah.
So we just need to leave it out of the memo.
Yeah, I must have. Sorry.
So we need to make a change to the memo, is that?
I'm assuming that's project 11 there, is that what that is?
Yes, it is. Somehow I've stuck it in there.
Just want to make sure it's done.
Yeah. Started with the west to make sure we had that one. I think so.
And actually, I looked to staff, it might be a benefit to the committee to, since these changes were initiated by DOT, the concept behind that, because we have a lot of projects here that exceed probably what we're allocated either through AMATS or through the principal arterials, but if maybe Ken or Jim or James, Ken, go ahead.
So our effort or our goal here is twofold. It's there to be as a fallback in the event that one of the larger projects like O'Malley or Emmett Road falls through schedule-wise due to other delivery challenges. But it's also to have projects on the shelf in the event that there's additional funding that's made available. That has been successful in the past. At this point, we essentially have nothing on the shelf, if you will, that we can pull off and get out of the street. This is for that. The 1R projects are simplistic in scope. They address primarily the pavement surface and also curb ramps and intersections. They even age well on the shelf.
Yeah, and it's Mr. Martin's credit that the state has actually been putting additional money into arterials in Anchorage so that they don't have to compete with other AMATS projects. So it's basically added another 40 to 50% of funding to projects within Anchorage. Okay, so we have a motion. Do we have a motion? Excuse me. Any other comments from the committee? Audience? Anybody real excited about our asphalt? It's back to the committee. What is the will of the group? Moved by Mr. Lux, seconded by Mr. Lindemuth. And to approve with the understanding there's a correction to the memo. Does this require policy committee approval as well?
No, this would just be.
This is just a minor adjustment to the.
It's just an admin mod.
Yeah, an administrative mod. Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Anybody opposed? Well done, staff. Thank you. It is approved. Any other business items before this group? Okay, so that brings us to informational reports. 6A, the 2015-18 TIP Major Amendment Number 1, Gamble Street Project. So this is an informational report?
It is.
Okay. Mr. Lyon.
So you're probably familiar with that project. The Gamble Street project is basically changing the current configuration from 4 lanes to 3 lanes. At the July 24th policy committee meeting, they requested that, they voted to request that the Gamble Street redevelopment project be considered as amendment number 1 to the 2015 to the 18 TIP. So, in recognition of your consideration of that, staff has suggested that if you, the 2 committees in their consideration of that decide that it should be added, then staff is suggesting it be put into table 8, which is the category that in the past has been, the table in the past which has been earmarks, that is now includes some earmarks, all earmarks obviously, some of their state and locally funded projects. That's where we put state capital projects in there. So we would suggest that it be put in table 8, and the funding be similar to what is in there now for the our crossing project, which is shown as illustrative, since money has not, or funds have not been identified for that project as of yet. So if we put it in there in that manner, show illustrative, then if funding were to come along, we could program it according to how the funding goes. And obviously there are other ways that if you consider this to decide to add it, there are other places to put it, but this is what staff would suggest, as opposed to coming out of our allocation right now. I'm happy to answer questions if you have them.
Mark.
Now, there was, just if I remember right, there was some discussion about having to amend it. Was that not the case anymore?
Well, the original suggestion or staff recommendation when this came before the policy committee was to be considered, this project would be considered in the context of regional impacts as part of the next update to the MTP. There's some discussion that there are some projects in the MTP that kind of are related to this, there's nothing in the MTP that suggests moving it from quarterly to 3. So that was why the suggestion was to consider that project in the context of the next one. And if we were doing that MTP update and we agreed that we should add a project in that changed from 4-lane to 3-lane, in the whole spectrum of doing the modeling and the analysis and the financial analysis, et cetera, we would look at the project holistically and give a suggestion. The policy committee, at their meeting, suggested that this project would be considered as Amendment 1 to the TIP. So that's why it's before you today. Our original suggestion was to, when you do the new MTP, look at the project, how it relates holistically to the entire the traffic system. The policy committee asked that we consider it as Amendment number 1. If that makes sense, or if I completely blended the line.
I guess the question is, if we can proceed without it being in the MTP, and we can put this in the TIP, and
Well, there are other projects that are in Table 8 that are, not all the earmarks are in the MTP. So, as we get a capital expenditure, it may or may not be in there.
We actually have table 8 before us because it's part of the, so if I understand correctly, this is simply an informational item, and what staff is saying that if it is the desire of the technical committee to add this project to the TIP, this is a way it could be done. Is that correct?
Well, when we prepare a major amendment to the TIP, there's a lot that goes into it. And so I didn't necessarily want to bring before you a major amendment right now, do the work involved in that, and then have you consider it and recommend to the policy committee that, no, we didn't want to do it that way, we want to do it a different way. So I wanted to bring it before you as informational to get your sense, and maybe you would recommend the policy committee to get their sense of where they actually want to put it in the TIP, if they indeed wanted to add it into the TIP. Again, the language from the policy committee was to consider it as amendment number 1.
That's where specific language is be considered.
That's exactly what they
And
said.
if they consider it at such time as they're doing amendment number 1. So is there other comment?
I just have a comment, a question, Greg. So I think it's interesting that they'd be in Table 8, given the other projects that are in Table 8. It sort of fits. Is the goal there then, if we went through an amendment process, then we were to include it in the TIP, the conversation about where we put it in the TIP would be, we've already had that conversation, it would be in Table 8. And tell me more about why Table 8 and not Table 3.
If we put it in Table 3, and we need to get, we have to have a nomination form and specific parameters of the project and the scope and the schedule and the dollar figures.
Okay.
And then we would need to add it in there and move other projects out.
Assuming it's scored well.
Assuming it's scored well enough, we
Okay.
would need to add it in there and move other projects out, because there
Okay.
obviously is a finite amount of dollars
Okay.
in our allocation. So, that's a different exercise. Table 8 are, we put state grant funded projects in there, we put some large local projects in there, we put earmarks in there. So if, one of the possibilities for this project is to fund it through a state legislative grant. And you can easily plot that into Table 8 and show, here's the funding, and, let whoever's gonna build it, and it's just in there for illustrative purposes. Right now, unless someone has information or more information, I don't know of any funding attached to this project, and so that's why I recommended it in Table 8 with illustrative as the funding source.
Madam Chairman,
Yes. Mr.
question
Weaver?
then. If it is amended into Table 8, it's illustrative, and funding does become available, what are the consequences of that?
Well, again, Table 8 is outside of our fiscally constrained portion of the TIP, so You could have $1 billion in there, you could have 400 million, $1,000. It doesn't matter what the dollar figure is because it's outside of our fiscally constrained tip. When I first started, every project in there was an earmark. There were no other funds in there. So those were federal funds that had to be shown that they might be utilized in the Anchorage area, but they weren't part of our fiscally constrained tip. Since that time, Table 8 has grown to include other federally funded projects, other state funded projects, and other locally funded projects. So we kind of ballooned it into other things. It wouldn't have an impact on the funding if it was in Table 8 because it's outside of our fiscal constraint.
It doesn't really have any impact on the AMATS funding, but if it were appropriation, a direct appropriation from the state, the consequences of that, I'm just trying to understand the significance of us including it as illustrative when it's not actually in the tip for construction with federal monies, but potentially could be constructed with other monies.
I might be able to help in that because illustrative is a term that's also used for the STIP and how the state applies. So I can explain that. The use of illustrative shows that the intent, basically the intent of an organization, whether it's an NPO or a state DOT, that it's a project that is important yet is beyond the fiscal constraints of the federal program. And it shows there, though, it gives yourself, it gives you a leg up, if you will, through process if indeed funding does become available. Even if it's a state-funded project, it's similar to the Kinnickinnic Crossing. Even if it were funded with non-federal funds, if the organization, the MPO, AMATS, deems it to be a project of regional significance, it's required to be shown in the tip anyway, even just to reflect those non-federal funds. I guess the question, does that help answer
Well,
your question?
the question is, really has to do with that we really haven't done the analysis with respect to 4-lane to the 3-lane. We're kind of giving validity to it by putting it even as illustrative that it's challenging.
I guess that leads to my question, if anything on a technical side has changed since the staff had recommended the technical committee and the technical committee reported on the policy committee for approval to recommend that it be considered, as you said, as in the context of the larger LRTFA or NPFA. Anything else change?
Not as far as I know. I could be wrong, but not as far as I know.
Okay, so this is brought to us just as information. You don't need any action by this body?
No, again, the policy committee asked that it be considered as amendment number 1 on the tip. And our suggestion was if it is going to be considered and added, this would be our one suggestion. So I guess I was kind of throwing it to you to kind of give some thought, advice. My idea was to take it to the policy committee with the same kind of idea. They asked us to consider it, just as an informational, see what their feedback is. Do they think that is where it should be added, if it would be added? Should it not be added? I don't know. That's what I'm looking for.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. Martin.
This corridor is a route of regional significance. The concept behind it has a lot of attraction, a lot of appeal. The timing, however, is a bit of a challenge as well. It's my sense that it needs to be done once we have a larger understanding of where Cavada, the Kinnickinnic project is at, and the highway-to-highway project. Implementing this without those larger projects being answered is it's a break in the future. Going towards a direction that encourages that. So this is informational, I guess. We're looking for information. I do not support that.
Okay, it's not on our agenda for action. Is there any other comment from the committee before we open it up to the public?
that Mr. Ryan was referencing. I think we can consider this, so perhaps we could reflect in the record that it has been considered without action at this time. If policy committee that actually read our meeting minutes.
Okay. Any other comments before we open it? Open it up to the floor on this informational item. We have two people, Mr. Anderson and Mr. Hinkle.
I would just like to reinforce what Mr. Morton said, that doing this project prior to highway going forward would end up ripping up and wasting most of the money that would be invested in it. It needs to happen after highway to highway or as part of highway to highway. But doing it in advance of highway to highway would leave us with major problems in terms of volume capacity, and would end up being wasted when we finally do highway to highway. They get ripped up.
Okay, Mr. Hinkle.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Bob Kniefel. I am a representative for the Purdy area as part of the work on this project, and we've been here many times talking about where the project's at, where it's headed to, and what's going on. Maybe just to clarify a couple of things. One, the current MTP does show 3 lanes on Gamble Street from 9th Avenue south, so it's not like we're making a big change from that. The only reason north of 9th Avenue is it's included with the connection to the infamous second phase of the kindergarten crossing. So it goes to 4 lanes there because it has to handle, under the current design in the model, that the kindergarten crossing brings all the traffic headed east, that comes south down to 9th Avenue, crosses over, goes back up to 6th Avenue, and then heads east on the infamous Glen Highway and that. So that's the reason for that. So we're not out of line with MTP as far as the conversion to the 3-lane facility. Secondly, I think the one thing the neighborhood has tried to stress many times to this group, and that is the highway to highway is a dead issue at this point. Maybe with the new governor, maybe with other changes going on, we'll see what happens. But right now, highway to highway is dead, and so the community then is dead for what's happening in this area now. And they're trying to move forward. They've made a major effort looking at both the roadway stuff. They've made a major effort with their own community development plan, and they see this as one of the keys to making that work. I would suggest that I think we've provided 4 or 5 different approaches on what the various traffic volumes say and what can happen with and without it, what the effect on the other major facilities in the area are in that. And again, I think all the information that we've got available to us using the existing models is that there is not a major impact due to the conversion from 4 lanes to 3 lanes on this. And the benefits of achieving both the safety improvements, providing safety aspects for both the pedestrians, and improving the facility itself in that has some definite benefits. And I know it's a trade-off. I'm not here to say it's not a big trade-off. But I think there's been ample information to show that it is viable as a project, both from a capacity viewpoint, as part of the MTP currently in that, and just as an overall community approach that we need to do something to make that work better there. So, and I guess I'm concerned that if you put it into the illustrative program, what the impact is. And I know that there's been a lot of work behind the scenes by the community. They are very active in about 4 different methods in how to fund the project, both some creative financing in that, along with some typical financing objectives, and they're still working through that. That's all been put on hold with the election, of course, knowing that we have a new governor coming in with the staff. Not sure where that's all going to head in that. There's been a lot of discussion on the local economic development front on how to make it happen too. So I would just say that I would hope that you would consider all of these items. And I know it's an informational, so you're not really taking action on it today. And I keep wondering why it's never an action item rather than an informational item. But I would think that as you look through the process, that it is a viable project. The community has strong support for it. The safety and other benefits to the community are very strong at this point, and that you provide proper consideration of that.
Anybody else from the audience? Mr. Lindenboom.
I've got two ignorant questions here. First, did DOT ever reach a conclusion about what the answer of highway to highway is? Last I saw, there was still 3 or 4 different versions, and my recollection is you were still in there running around and trying to sell it to everybody before it got killed.
I'll let Mr. Moore answer your ignorant questions.
Yes.
As the final project manager of that effort, it was narrowed down to, call it 2.5 options. One was going to be winnowed out on fiscal constraints.
Okay.
One is, of the two that remain, one is what is largely shown in the MTP, as the graphic.
Okay. And my second.
And then the other one goes to the, it sweeps up, goes south of Merrill Field and around Airport Heights. It skips the dump and between there and hospital.
Yet that narrowed down to 2.5 options was not ever presented to the public, or
It was not presented to the public.
because the project was stopped.
Okay.
So but the other point that comes out of this that's worth talking about, though, is the termini of the project. So essentially 20th, the creek, if you will. And the other would be the intersection at Airport Heights.
Right.
That was useful to learn that.
Right. Question number 2, where does it live in the MTP? Short, medium, illustrative? Again, granted.
Short and long term, it is in the MTP in its entirety. It's still recognized as the backbone of the transportation system in Anchorage.
Agree, I'm just.
Yeah, and I think, the parts that are in the short term were
3600 interchange, and then the Midtown congestion, and then the 20th to Airport Heights.
Right, well, we only get overlap on this project, not counting the traffic fluttering that goes around the periphery, but we only get direct overlap between 15th and 6th or something like that, right? Okay, that's all I have. But trying to get it all straight in my head. Okay.
Mr. Moore.
Follow-up comment if I could. If this was an action item, and if it did end up in the tip, even in table 8,
Yeah.
that would send the message that that action would be supported by AMATS. I don't know that that's really the right message. And the other comment I have relates to the timing. If the project interests are successful in identifying funding, there's always time to reconsider at that point, because this is a table that's not fiscal constrained. There's no reason for it to happen now. And if it does happen now, there's no reason for it to happen.
Anybody else? Mr. Hanson, I think we've heard from you all day.
I'm still in jet lag.
Oh, okay. Welcome
It's
back.
been a week.
Finding is hard, you're still on a golf course in Arizona.
Yeah.
Body's here, though.
Okay, and so, no action is needed from the technical committee, and it would just go to the policy committee and reporting on. Okay, that brings us to, we had deferred item number 6B, and item 6C, informational report, travel demand model planning assumptions. And if you want to fill us in on the work session or whatever's coming up.
Real quickly, at the policy committee, when it was discussed, they requested that the TAC or that AMATS staff contact and set up some work session with the Matsu folks to get together so we could kind of come to the table and kind of figure out what both sides were doing and where their assumptions were based on, and see if we could get together on that. So we've scheduled that work session or that meeting for December 17th. It's from 1 to 3 in the mayor's conference room. So meeting, and you're welcome to show up. That's about it.
Okay, and it's on everybody's calendar, I think it's done. And then the ITS architecture update, it's been a very busy week.
Madam Chair, I don't want to take too long. This is the first update of the architecture that was adopted in 2004 by the policy committee. It's basically about integration of systems, and I really would rather let Mr. Jacobson just take it from here.
Thank you. I'd refer you to the handout, Regional ITS Architecture Update Fact Sheet. I'll go through this real quickly because we're pretty early in the project. There's going to be a couple other times that we come to this group to talk about the project, but I did want to introduce what it is. An ITS architecture is essentially a blueprint for how different technology systems and transportation fit together, and what kinds of information might be shared among those systems. We are in the kind of first third probably of the project, where we have collected some stakeholder input. We've put together some draft ideas of what that architecture would look like, and then we bounced that again off some stakeholders yesterday in a workshop. We'll go off now and gather some more information, as well as process the information that we got yesterday. From that, we'll update the architecture to provide back for comment. Part of what we're doing also is related to the congestion management plan, how the ITS system fits into congestion management, and vice versa, how they can leverage the systems and processes in each. And that we'll be sharing more with in a workshop in February. And then the final workshop that we'll have on here is to explore the concept of a regional transportation operations center through just kind of what some of the concepts might be of what that works. We anticipate that then in April, we will have essentially a completed architecture that we would then again come to this group first for concurrence to take to the policy committee for adoption.
And a little bit of what we reviewed.
Okay, so yesterday what we presented were some of the focus areas were essentially arterial traffic management, essentially traffic signals, transit management, emergency and incident management, and traveler information, and then kind of overlay on that were how data. We got into a discussion on what was a data archive. So from an architecture speak, anything that's not real-time data is archive data. So it was how data that has already been stored somewhere can be used by others. So that was another one. And
The fire department was present, and it was really interesting to hear what they would like to hear. They'd like to have like real-time information on road closures, for example. And it was really good to have, there were like 17 people in the room, and they don't have the opportunity, they're all operations people, and they don't have the opportunity to really sit down and talk with each other about this. It's just boots on the ground, realistic, real-life data needs and information exchanges that they would like to have, or maybe not have. Maybe some people don't want to share the data, but it's a good planning tool. It really is.
I was there yesterday. We missed the railroad. We sorely missed the railroad. But there was some good stuff that came out of it. I went to it thinking, oh boy, it's gonna be a long morning. But actually, be honest, but there was, really some good dialogue got going, and just side benefits. I went back in the afternoon and talked to our security guys, and we probably will. We have some real-time camera data that could be very useful to emergency management and the fire department and APD. So we're looking at what it'll take. It doesn't take much to just let them have access to our cameras when is appropriate. So we're going to follow up on that. So for whatever else happened, that was valuable stuff.
Maintenance operations was the one I forgot,
Right.
especially
Maintenance.
snow and ice.
Yeah, and again, like today I showed up late and left early, and yet I found it very fascinating. And in the bigger picture, looking at it, that it had not been a requirement for the NPO to have an ITS architecture, you wouldn't necessarily have gotten all of those people together to talk about, oh, you guys have that. Hey, man, that would be, and I learned a lot. I was just there to observe, but also to help interface with some of the Subversa, contacts and some of the stuff. So it's actually, it was very useful, I thought. And it demystified what does it mean to be an architecture.
And that was the only other sad thing was that, and I don't know if when we got the invites, it didn't really maybe jump out. You had to kind of dig into it to see what it was really talking about. But Mark Littlefield was there from Subversa, but no one was there from street maintenance. Really would have been good to have, Ski or Paul Van Leiningham or someone there. So on future opportunities, I think it's really important that those guys participate in future workshops.
We did get input from street maintenance in the interviews, so they weren't there, but we have gotten their input.
Yeah. And it was well done. Thank you. I thought it was very good.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, other informational items. I think we have another workshop coming up, or a meeting. It's actually a joint meeting on Monday.
This coming Monday, 1:30 to 3:30 in the mayor's conference room.
That's to the policy committee, right?
That is a policy and technical committee. There's a
Oh, it's
presentation
both,
by
okay.
AMATS consultants on the summaries of their findings, et cetera. They're looking to report.
Yeah, nothing available in advance that we have at this point. You didn't give me.
I requested
Okay.
that.
And this body had also, Teresa had, there's AMATS had shared its modeling information, and there was some stipulation that were placed on the sharing the data, and that some of that was reciprocity and understanding what they are assuming is different. So it could be a very useful conversation for this group, as well as, especially as we're looking at the socioeconomic assumptions for the model and working with maps through. With that, anything else? Any other informational items? Anything else good for the good of the order? This is we're going to see each other a couple more times before the end of the year. So
If I may, the meeting, I believe, in March conflicts with the spring break for the Akron School District system.
Right.
It would be really swell if we could either move spring break a week or. I'll be going.
To make adjustments, that's a good point, because, and it's also, I think around the first week is when they're looking at for possibly certification. So, yeah, that's a good point. So I just got to take a look at the juggling like how to do for December and November. Thank you.
Can I make a general comment?
Sure.
Let's go over there. So, Greg, you and Vivian and for Teresa and James, this committee has put you guys through the ringer the last quarter. Intentionally at some level. But I think at the end, we've got a lot of good products. You've seen the CMP, the things that are in your control. You guys have put together, you and your team, your consultants put together some good work products to get us rolling. There are things that are out of your control that we're doing everything that we can. At some point, I think we're just going to have to do things differently as it relates to contracts. And I think Ken's offer earlier may be a path in order to get some stuff done, so we can get it figured out. Anyway, compliment to you guys. I mean, it's not been without test, so I appreciate it very much.
I would echo that as well. Anything else?
Just quickly, PM10. We came very, very close a couple of weeks ago, Friday. I think the air quality standard is 155 micrograms per cubic meter. We got 154. So we just missed it. That would have been, could have been non-attainment. But, so that's sort of, I guess that's good news.
Was that in Anchorage?
That was in Anchorage, started before the snow hit, and right along Tudor Road.
Seth?
But the follow-up to that story, and this is not related, but we have lost that site because the Allstate building there on Tudor Road is going to be raised by the owner.
Excellent.
And so it's closed. And so we're going to have another site on Tudor Road, but we start with a clean slate. We don't have, it's basically a 4 strikes you're out policy. We had 3 strikes.
pretty
and
substantial
almost at 4,
building.
but now we're at 0 strikes. But we'll have a similar location.
So when it is.
It's a full year, but I mean, it's done. That's yeah, we're to that site, we can't.
You might be onto something.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I know. Find out the those problems that we might be able to invest.
Thank you. Move to adjourn.